I've been instructed to do nothing but introduce Michael Berenbaum.
You got more to say?
A man who needs no introduction.
It usually works. Okay, that's yours. Hey folks, how you doing today? Having a good time so far? I'm Michael Berenbaum, and I'm happy to be sharing the stage today with some of the best television editors working in the business. They've worked on some amazing shows, and we're going to show you some great clips. And so let's bring them up right now. There we go. I want to get this right. From Billions, Bloodline, and Treme, we have film and TV editor Naomi Geraghty. Also, from Breaking Bad and Donovan, True Blood, and the XFiles, Emmy Award winner Lynne Willingham. My rock star editors today.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me just get this all set up. So, like I said, we have some great clips from some of those shows I mentioned. Not so many comedy clips today, but we'll try and keep it light and informative. So let's jump right in. I would like each of you to give a little intro briefly about how you got into the business, and I would also like to throw out the question that I get asked the most. What advice would you give to the people in the audience today if they're trying to get into the business or switch over from whether it's reality or commercials or industrials to get into narrative scripted editing? Lynn, you want to go?
Hi. How did I get into the business? My brother is an editor. His name is Steve Merkovich. And when we were both a bit younger, he was an assistant at Warner Brothers. And at the time, there were very few women in film editing. There's many more now. I mean, it's been traditionally a place where women land, which is great. And he said, you might like this. You know, it combined my love of storytelling. I'm a big reader. And I'd been an art major at UCLA. So it sort of brought it all home. I never studied film. I love them, but I never studied it. And because of the way the studios were set up in Los Angeles, it was easy to hide from the union rep and work for nothing at Universal. So that's what I did for about 6 months. I just went in every day after work and hung out. We were on film then, so there was a lot of physical work that had to be done. And the assistants there were very generous, and they taught me how. We were still in an apprentice assistant editor system. So at the time, before the union changed the rules, it had to be 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. So it was ostensibly 8 years before you were allowed to cut. And they taught me how to be an apprentice, and I was able to get a job first at a sound effects company that basically just put me on payroll and let me hang, and they got me into the union. And then I was able to go to Paramount, and they hired me for 2 weeks, and I stayed there for 5 years. So that was it. I got all the free education I could.
Yeah. Yeah, you take any opportunity that comes your way, and hopefully it leads to what you want to do. Naomi?
Well, I'm from Dublin in Ireland, and so in film school I would make short films, and I found I was really drawn to the process of editing. I just loved studying the footage and finding the pieces and putting it all together. And so when I left school, I worked really hard and hustled to try and get editing work in Ireland, which was really tough. And then I ended up getting a visa to come here, and when I got to New York, I found out all the hustle that I had managed to do in Dublin, it really paid off here. I started working in documentary, and I landed a job in Jonathan Demme's company working on a documentary about Nelson Mandela, which is where I met his amazing editor, Craig McKay. And I was lucky because at the time, everything was transitioning from film to Avid. Craig was making that transition too. And so he said to me one day, hey, how do you feel about doing a movie in Ireland with me? So I ended up going back to Ireland with him to do my very first feature as an assistant. And it was an incredible experience working with Craig. I apprenticed and was his assistant for 5 years, and it was like every day was a master class with him. And I sat beside him as he cut and worked with him really closely. And then I got my own opportunities with the first film that I had worked with him in Ireland was Terry George's first movie, and then he asked me to do a pilot with him for a TV show. And after that, I worked with Jim Sheridan again in Ireland and went on to do Hotel Rwanda with Terry, and then kept working, and so that's how I got my start.
I mean, working with Craig, that's kind of like the ideal situation.
You couldn't ask for better, yeah.
Yeah, but
I was very lucky.
that type of thing, sitting with the editor, very rare these days on the Avid. Usually editors working in a room by themselves, and the assistant's just prepping everything and getting everything organized. Do you let your assistants cut? Do you give them scenes?
My assistant's been with me for 5 years now, I think. No, almost 8 years, Susan Godfrey. And the lovely thing about Susan is she's a hell of a storyteller and a very good editor. She really needs to leave the nest, I think. But I encourage her to cut as much as possible. In fact, we're in the process of sharing a show now. I wanted to get her a single credit because that seems to help more. But because of studio rules and union rules and stuff like that, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But she's shared credit with me on 4 or 5 series that we've done now, and I'm for her being in the room as much as possible. It's a challenge because, as you say, assistants have so much to do now, between temp scores, getting dailies ready. Sound effects, visual effects, if you don't have a visual effects editor, that we're asking so much of our assistant, it's really hard for them to get in to a room and actually cut. A lot of times, she'll just come in and she'll just spend all of Saturday just cutting on her own, just
right,
because she wants to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It is. There's such a huge workload for assistants, but I mean, I am optimistic in the sense that I think in New York at least, there's so much television now, and I feel like there's a more solid architecture for assistants making the transition to assistant. I think it's really tough in features, but when an assistant works on a TV show, they get to know the showrunners and people are willing to give them a chance. I've just finished a season of Billions where my assistant Blake co-edited an episode with me, and I thought he did an amazing job, and he's been working with me for 2 seasons now, and I always give him as many scenes as he will take from me, and he's been doing an incredible job, so it was great.
I had the experience when I was an assistant. My editor also was telling me you got to get out and cut something. You got to, get out there and grab anything you could get. And then I got a job editing a little feature, and he got so mad at me that I was leaving. But anyway, so what advice do you have for these people out there? How many of you guys are editors now, or aspiring editors? And how many of you are working in like commercials or different types of things than what we do up here? So just you guys are interested in like switching over, or just curious as to what goes on in narrative, or any advice? It's tough to go from one lane to the other, because once you kind of get established in one area, that's what people know you as silly as that seems.
I mean, I think, for me, getting into the business, it was tough because you start, you're looking for a way to break in. But I found just engaging people and reaching out to anybody that you know or you have a connection with, or even cold calling or emailing somebody and saying, hey, can I take you out for coffee? And people love giving advice, People like to give advice. And I think we all remember how, tough it was getting in, or how intimidating it seemed. And that would be my advice, is reach out, talk to as many people as you can, assistant editors, and just try and have a conversation with people. I think we're all sort of united by our passion for film. And if you engage people on that level, I think they really respond.
Yeah, it is hard to switch lanes, though. At least I'm finding that the studios and networks are getting very, very persnickety about cable editors, what they call high-end cable editors. And it's like I have very, very good friends. Obviously, there's a lot of editors in Los Angeles, so I've got some really good friends who are, brilliant editors, and they can't make that leap into cable because of the catch-22. So, it's really kind of crazy. It's like you don't cut cable any differently than you cut, network drama, except for that sometimes you don't have to deal with commercials. It's in their heads that they're elite because they're a cable network, and so you must be elite. So you must be super special, more special than the guy who's cutting, CSI Miami or something. It's fake. It's just, it's like a television editor can't cut a feature. A drama editor can't cut comedy. It's these preconceptions that they make you crazy. The first movie of the week I ever cut, which was a really long time ago, I had been cutting, drama, and they said, well, this is 2 hours. And I said, oh, really? And I said, do I have to cut the second hour too? Is that what I have to do? I mean, it was like, come on, guys. It's 1 hour, it's 2 hours. Yeah, I get it. But in their head, I was making this giant leap in telling a story in 2 hours instead of one. And I see that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, people ask, a common question is, how do you cut differently if you're doing a feature or you're doing television? And basically, it's just politics and who your boss is. There's no difference. When I got the job cutting the pilot for Sex and the City, they wanted a feature editor because they wanted it to look cinematic, and we'll get into that in a minute. But then I did television for a few years, and nobody wanted to hire me on a feature. Because, he's a TV guy now. Oh, he's the comedy guy. He can't cut drama. He's the indie New York guy. So it's nuts, but it gets you get pigeonholed into like very little circles.
Well, and the other thing too is there's so much, syndicated live television that has biopacks and things like that is a great place to try and get into if you want to be an editor. But then you need to make the transitional jump to get into scripted. And you can do it because there's a lot of, live television or whatever, they go reality. There's a lot of reality. I don't know how much you have here, but there's a ton of it in Los Angeles. And, it's real hard to make that jump over into scripted, but it's an ideal place to come to Los Angeles, actually get a working job because there's so much of it there. And then try to meet as many people as you can and get out as soon as possible. Because it's a really hard job.
Yeah, really hard. I have feature editors call me and say, I can't get a job in television. They say I don't have episodic experience. You're not fast enough.
You're not fast enough.
And it's sorry, but we want to be encouraging, but that's the reality of what's out there. So the word cinematic is thrown around a lot these days, and our theme for today is TV is the new black. So how would you describe the fact that television is so great these days? It's way better than most features. What's behind this? What's caused TV to be so great these days? Is it the writing? Is it the fact that it's harder to get a feature made, so more feature people are working in television?
I had a conversation with one of my showrunners, David Hollander, and what he liked about being able to tell Ray Donovan over 10 episodes is really developing a story that did not have to be told in 2 hours. Consequently, I think you're seeing more talent, more high-end talent, committing to these longer arcs, these 10-hour arcs. They can do that, then they can come, like Liev, he can do 10 episodes, and then he can come and do a Broadway play. It doesn't take up their whole year like episodic television used to. It used to be that you had 22 to 26 episodes of a show. When we were doing the XFiles, that was the normal thing. We would do at least 22 episodes a year. That tied you up for 9 to 10 months. Now we're telling that same story in 10 episodes, we're working, well, the production is probably producing film for about the same amount of time, but you're getting longer to tell the story, you're getting more money, you're attracting higher end talent. You know, on Ray Donovan, we've got Susan Sarandon, we've got, you know, John Voight, we've got Academy Award winning people wanting to do television because they can invest in a character for a longer period of time.
And I think, you know, the studios, unfortunately, have ceded really the real storytelling to television right now. I mean, you know, they're making, you know, superhero movies and these huge franchises, and the real stories, I think the most compelling stories are really happening in television, you know, and I think it's drawing so much great talent. There's great roles for women, there's great roles for older actors. And I think it's stories that we kind of sort of, that's where the adult storytelling is taking place. And you know, what I love about, say, some of the shows that I've been lucky enough to work on is it explores some really flawed characters, people who have really, you know, they're very complex, you know, and I think it's just great storytelling, and unfortunately we're not seeing as much of that in movies these days.
Has working on the great shows that you guys have been working on, have you changed the way you work or your workflow in any way because of the better writing or the different types of characters you've been dealing with?
Well, I mean, I've gone from movies to TV, so that workflow is different because you know, the wonderful thing about cutting movies is that you really get a lot of time. You get time to go down rabbit holes and explore something, you know, for a couple of weeks, and then you come out of that rabbit hole and be like, that didn't work at all, we've got to try again, you know. You don't get that on television. Like, you know, on a movie I could spend 8 to 12, 14 months cutting it. On a TV show, you generally do it in about 6 weeks and hours of TV. So to me, that's you know, that's definitely a big challenge. And it's a little harder because you don't get to explore quite as much, but the writing, I mean, some of the writing now is so great, you know, that you can get it done in that time.
Yeah. Now, Lynn, maybe you could talk about how it is in LA, but the good news for everyone here is that it's almost never been this busy in New York. There are so many shows being filmed here because of the tax credit. And whereas a lot of them used to go back to LA to post, a lot of them are posting here. And it's so busy that almost 100% of the assistants are working. All the editors are working. Sometimes I'll get calls for like multiple shows, or we can't find anybody, we have to bring someone in from LA to work on a show here. Is it like that in LA too?
Well, we have an awful lot of product. Thank God we've got a lot of television product now. There are people out of work in Los Angeles in our business, there's no doubt about it. And perhaps it's because shows have gone to New York.
Crews are smaller.
Yeah, to Atlanta, to New Orleans, to Georgia. I mean, we just have a lot of shows traveling out of state all the time, but there's a lot of work. There's never been more. I mean, how many networks are there now? It's ridiculous.
Apple TV, PlayStation,
yeah, exactly.
Facebook.
Just tons and tons of people doing new content, and everybody wants, you know, Apple TV, for instance, is committed, I think it was a couple $2 billion to dropping like 10 to 15 shows next fall. I mean, that's huge. They haven't started yet. That's an enormous amount of television. They can't start a network unless they have enough shows. And they haven't really started. They'll be starting in the next few months, starting to, you know, produce these shows. But it's phenomenal. There's never been a better time for television.
Yeah, and Netflix, they want to release a new movie like once a month or once a week. They're just, they're putting a lot of money into things. So I'm going to throw a word at you guys. And just tell me what your thoughts are. When you're reading a script and you see the word montage, what do you think?
Yuck. It depends on the montage, but you know, it depends on the montage, it depends on the director, it depends the subject of the montage, whose montage is it. The problem in, like we're cross-boarding Ray Donovan right now, so I've got half a montage. So I've got, 4 minutes of music, which is a bit too long in my opinion, and all these scenes, and I'm missing half of it. So now I'm trying to cut something to the beat with black slugs and title cards, and it's very difficult. The problem to me, even more so in a montage, is that it's so subjective. I think the montage should look one way, and then your director gets in, and he thinks it should look another way. I find those areas of a film generally take more time than anything else because, we all have different ideas on what we want to emphasize, and usually, because it's so freeform and fun, the director shoots gads of film. So it's kind of like a mini documentary in the middle of your show, which it's just like, okay, fine. I try to pass it off to my assistant and say, hey, wouldn't you like to cut this
Give this a
montage?
shot.
They're going, not so much. So, for me.
I mean, I exactly what you mean. I often just read it and I'm sort of inner groan because it can often be, it's the most time consuming because so much footage is often shot. And maybe there's an underlying idea, but it's not quite formed. And so you spend a lot of time. But then by the end of it, I often have the most fun cutting montage. So, but it is, you really have to immerse yourself in it. And getting there can be painful. Getting to what the final thing is can often be a lot of pain. But a lot of fun too,
So basically, editors hate montage. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of thing it is.
About it.
I read a script not too long ago where every 15 pages it said we'll have a montage, and it was like, okay, there's no way I want to do this particular project because it means the writer just couldn't bother to figure out how to write it without throwing a song in there and different images. I mean, if it advances the story, if it's
Right.
part of what's going on, then at least you have a direction. You have a trajectory of where this thing goes. Otherwise, it's just style over substance, kind of.
Well, it's style, and then the DP gets all tricky and goes, oh, I'm going to shoot this at 30 frames per second. And you look at the film, and everything else is at 24, and then the next day something comes in at 32. And you're going, what is he thinking? What is this? And then I find when it's working, against something like we're using a hip-hop song, it's like, this isn't working for me at 30. So and then I have to do the math to figure out how to get it back to 24.
Right.
And then it has to go to the lab, and it's like everybody gets real artistic on montages.
Yeah.
Everybody.
I find about 50% of the time when they shoot slow motion, you're putting it back to 24.
Exactly.
Right?
That's definitely true.
Yeah. And then it has a little jumps in it because you can't figure out quite how to get it right. All right, well, let's go to our first clip. Our first clip is from the pilot of Breaking Bad. And I have to say, I'm sure you guys know the show, and this probably is one of the top openings of any series that has ever been made. Do you want to say anything before we show it?
It will make me look brilliant, but the thing is, it was all on the page and in the camera. Vince Gilligan wrote it and directed it, and reading the script, anytime you ever get a chance to read a Vince script, it's beautifully written. Just it's all there. And he had this plan, he had been living with this character, I think, for a couple years as he'd been writing the script and figuring out the story and the whole thing. And he just knew what he wanted. And so it was just easy. It was just like, I'll just cut it this way because that's how he shot it. That's what he wants. The pants, just so you know, are practical. That is not a visual effect when they throw up into the air.
What take was that? That was one of my questions.
I have no idea.
When you see it, you'll see what she's talking about.
I'm sure he took it, 15 or 20 times, but I have no idea which take it was.
It's a pretty amazing
It is.
way it turned out.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing all the way around.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a pilot.
All right, here we go. that was intriguing. That really sets it up pretty well. We talked about the pants. So now, obviously, with hindsight, we know how this show went on to win so many awards and accolades. Did you know when you were working on it that what you had in your hands?
I knew when I read the script because, first of all, it was Vince. We'd worked together on the XFiles, and he was the finest writer on the XFiles. Even Chris Carter would tell you that, reluctantly. He was just brilliant and funny and dark, and I don't think any of us knew it would be as big a phenomenon as it turned out to be. But we knew it was special, and you know, the thing about it is that, and it sort of touches into your, you know, the point of this whole panel was the cinematic revolution or something of film. I've been in scripted television for, well, 40 years, I think. So I've never been out of television. I've always been in television. And of course, there was no cable, really, in the, let's say, the 80s. I started editing on episodic network television, and things were tight, and they were, you know, everything was filmed like right in here so you could see people's faces. And when we did Breaking Bad, it's probably one of the very first shows that said, Albuquerque is a character, and we're going to show you as much of this as we can. There was an executive at AMC, and this was her pet project, and I'm sorry, but her name sort of escapes me right now. I might spit it out later, and it'll look like, you know, I have Tourette's or something. But she was really a source, especially for the music. And she said, I want this to look like an independent feature, and that's what Vince went for when he did it. And it opened up, I think, for filmmakers on television permission to use the whole screen, to use a city or a location as a character. In Ray Donovan, we used Los Angeles for years. Now we're using New York. And it becomes part of the atmosphere of the whole thing. You couldn't do Breaking Bad in Los Angeles. You couldn't do it in New York. You know, you needed those big, vast, open spaces to be part of what it was. And I think that really was groundbreaking.
Here's some specific questions. So the pants float down, they hit the ground, and it's only then that we hear the trailer driving, once it enters the frame. Was that a decision that you made in the cutting room, or was it, I mean, obviously you would have heard it coming before that?
My guess is we probably, unless it was written in the script, which is possible, that we don't hear any sound until, we would have temp tracked it and then pulled it out on the dub stage or had that decided in a spotting session with sound. My feeling is we don't hear anything. I imagine there's some atmospheric noises that we hear in there that are pretty subtle. But
there's probably some wind, and I think you can almost like hear the Foley of the pants hitting the ground.
Yeah.
And then as the van enters frame, then you hear it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was probably written into the script.
So in the cutting before he crashes, one particular time we're on him, you have 2 jump cuts on Walter. Now, I just wondered, is that something you did initially, or was that something that you realized over the course of cutting the show that would be a style that you might want to use later, and you went back and added it, or because it was? Did you know at the time that you were just going to have jump cuts within the show?
I wish I could remember 100%. I'm thinking that we probably, in our very, very first cut, it probably was more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And then it probably became a thing where we really want to frenzy him up. And jump cutting, which you'll see in the montages and things like that in Breaking Bad, became a very deliberate jump cutting style. As it happens, and I don't know for those of you who've seen the pilot and then or the series, the montages of the drug making stuff. Actually, Kelly Dixon cut the first one. I was so busy, Kelly Dixon of international fame now. I was so busy, and she was my assistant, and
They're very creative.
and she's really a wonderful editor.
Yeah.
And I just said, she knew how much I hated cutting music videos, and she just said, aren't you going to do this? And it was like, yeah, but I got all this other stuff to do. I said, do you have time to do this? And she said, yeah, I have time to do this. So she did it, and it sort of was like, wow, this is great. And then it really did become fun. I mean, it was like, okay, we have a style, and this is where we're going with it. And it really, became a signature of the series, and it was a hoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to do stuff like that. I just wondered because I would imagine it was more fluid than maybe when you realized, wow, there's going to be jump cuts in the show. We have to sort of establish it right at the outset that that's going to be part of the show, or maybe just imagining.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say if Winston said, get in there and mix it up.
Yeah.
It was a very aggressive opening after the pants fell. And so I do have a tendency in action to jump things forward, so it's possible that I thought of that, but it's also possible I didn't, and we just added it later.
We'll give you credit for it.
I don't honestly know. I will take credit, though, for the video camera, when he talks into the video camera. That was never intended for the episode. And it's a really interesting thing for y'all to remember, is that just because someone doesn't think you should be using film in a certain place, if you think you should, go for it. I had no direction from Vince on the video camera. I didn't know that the video camera was only intended to be used in an episode at the end of the season. Actually, because of the writer's strike, we only did the first 7, and then the following season we did something else. It was only ever intended to, I think, be used at the very end of a series. And he said he had done that at the time so that when he ended the series, because he knew where it was going, even on that day, even when he started, that he could have that video for Skylar and his son. But I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh, he's turned the camera into his face, and he's talking to his wife. Hello. I don't want to be on the side of his face. I want to be here. And there was no camera in his face. So I said, okay, I'll just use this. And I love that moment where he's like, oh, it's me, it's Walter White,
It's really great because it changes the tone completely, and it's a really moving moment.
Thank you. I thought so too. And when he saw it, he just went, wow, I never intended to use it there. So, it's like there's film that people, even the people who create things, don't. You can surprise them sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's great when that happens. Sometimes you'll cut something, and you can, if this has happened to you, you'll cut something, and you think you've solved the problem, and here it is, it finally works. And then the director or the showrunner comes in and says, no, that's not what I intended. To do it this way, how I meant to do it. Now, if you have a really great showrunner, when he takes it home and thinks about it and shows it to his buddies, and he'll come back and say, you were right, go back to the way you had it. Yeah. For both of you, do you find, what's the difference between cutting a pilot versus the series of a show? Anything that's different?
I mean, yeah, because the pilot it's so fraught usually. Everybody's you don't know if you're going to get picked up. Everybody's really stressed out, and often you're finding the tone of the show. On Billions, we certainly were we really worked the pilot. There was such a particular tone of drama and comedy in the show, and we had to find that the first time around, and continue to find it through the first season, actually. So there is something really wonderful about when the show has sort of found its feet, that you have latitude a little bit. Everybody's a little bit more relaxed and open. So I certainly find I've only cut 2 pilots, but I found it to be it's quite a rigorous, stressful experience.
Yeah, the stakes are really high, and everybody. I just did last year the Claws pilot, and the guy who wrote the show, Elliot Lawrence, had never done television, he'd done some video spots that went. He had a show, I think it was My Big Gay Comedy, that went direct to streaming. And he's a very funny, lovely, lovely man. And he had an experienced showrunner with him, which was good. And the two of them together, Janine Sherman Barwa is the other showrunner. They were fabulous, but they were nervous. You know, I mean, she was more nervous than him because she knew what was at stake. He was just nervous just because it was also new, and there was a lot of style that had to be created. You know, your network is down your throats just about at that time. They're nervous. You know, I've only done 3 pilots, I think, and both of them were, thank God, with really, really lovely people. But I didn't feel the nervousness. You know, funny thing on Breaking Bad, I guess I wasn't experienced enough at that time to know that this was such a deal. I did feel it when we did Claws, and yeah.
For me, one of the biggest challenges is when you're doing the series, you have your music library that exists from your show, and especially later seasons. When you're temping a show, you just go to an old episode, or you have a bin of all your music from the composer's written. When you're doing a pilot, it could be anything. And I did a pilot where we went through like 3 music editors and 10 composers, and they kept saying, just do it more like Danny Elfman, do it more like Danny Elfman. So after like 10 composers, they finally hired Danny Elfman.
Were they happy?
They were very happy. So let's go to our next clip. Naomi, this is a clip from Billions. You want to say anything before we see it?
I think I'd prefer to just watch it and see.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Great. So when I watch that, I think you don't need a car chase. You don't need anything but 2 great actors and great writing, and you get a lot of drama. How did you approach doing this scene?
You know, I think with Billions, it's the language is so rich, and our actors are incredible. So it really is about trying to respect the writing and the performances and trying to protect the integrity of those performances. But you know, there's also obviously you have all these, you know, you've got a whole array of footage that you're trying to create a coherent narrative out of, and there was a lot of different sizes. You know, there's like this. It's the finale. I don't know how many people here follow Billions, but this is the final scene of the finale of our first season, and you know, Paul Giamatti plays the U.S. attorney who's pursuing a case against Damian Lewis's character, and he's a hedge fund manager, and he's convinced that Damian Lewis is involved in inside trading. And so there's been this cat and mouse game for the whole season, and they've pursued each other to the degree that they're destroying themselves in the process, you know. And so that it's that sort of relentless pursuit of each other, and that idea of we don't, you know, we're going to give up everything, including we're going to destroy ourselves in the process. And so that is this big climax to this episode. And it really was about trying to, you know, balance. I mean, it's finding the balance of performance really in this face-off between them, and keeping that aggression going, and feeling their aggression towards each other, and that zeal that they both have to you know, destroy the other.
Tell us a little bit about the use of music, because it seems like this scene could play without music, and I don't know if you guys even noticed, but there's music playing throughout the entire piece, except for maybe like 5 seconds before the song comes in at the end. Was that was that always like that, or did somebody decide?
It was actually. I felt like that we always would need music, and we have a great composer on the show, Eskimo, and we also have a great music editor. And before, as I was cutting the scene, I really discussed it with the music editor. Actually, we had a great music editor, Nancy Allen, and she and I, she understood exactly what I was going for, because I felt like we really needed to build this tension, and there needed to be this sort of underlying grinding kind of tonal music. And
was that from the composer, or did you?
We had tempted with material from Brendan, who's Eskimo, and I early on got her a cut as soon as I could. Like, even I remember I was cutting that scene right before Christmas, and before I left, I gave her just my really rough version of the scene and asked her to like try different pieces of music with it, and she did. And when we came back, it was sort of a back and forth process. I would cut to music, and then I would give her new cuts, and then she would recut. And in the beginning, Brendan had composed a piece of music that would take us out as well. And so his piece of music built to the end and went over the credits. But our showrunner, Bryan Koppelman, has a fantastic sense of music. He came from the music industry himself, and so he I don't know if you watch Billions, but Billions has incredible songs in every episode, and he writes those episodes. Sometimes he tells me there's one song for every episode, and he writes that episode to that song.
I looked it up. The song's called "Dimed Out" by
Titus Andronicus.
I don't know. Has anybody ever heard of the? But it's
and we went back and forth a lot of it on that song. I mean, I think the tone of that song is amazing, but we were always a little bit worried that you couldn't really hear the lyrics, and so we tried a lot of other songs, but nothing quite had the energy of that song.
Yeah,
and
powerful.
And it's really it was really powerful. But then Bryan brought that track. And we tried it early on, and we tried a lot of other different ones, but nothing ever quite came up to it,
All right, cool. One of the problems with having so much production is there's so many shows that you don't get to watch. Like I'm sure everyone's had the experience of a friend or relative said, "You have to watch this show," and you're like, "Well, my DVR is at 95%. I can't do that anymore." So I know that most of you've seen or heard of Billions and Ray Donovan and Breaking Bad. Who's heard of a show called Hap and Leonard? 1, 2, okay, that many. Okay, so I have a clip that they asked me to provide a clip as well, and this is from a show called Hap and Leonard that was on Sundance Channel, and there were 3 seasons, and I was just going to show the opening sequence to season 1, and I think you'll like it, and maybe you'll go back and check it out when you have some time. Anyway. All right, sorry, Lynn, I don't think we'll have time. So let's open up for some questions. Maybe turn the lights up a little bit, if possible, over here.
Billions had a bunch of cuts throughout the whole dialogue, and that was really great. So I guess my question is, when you're editing such a heavy dialogue scene, do you start initially with just the pacing, and then do you switch, like on your second review of it, to other angles that you may want to use just to, cut what the visual is, or do you focus on the pacing overall?
No, I would say I focus on, I think you start out by screening all your footage and reading the scene and really trying to figure out what is this scene about, where is the dramatic tension coming from, and then when you're looking at the footage, you start forming that architecture of your mind, like where do I want to be in terms of the shots, like where do I want to be in this place in time as the scene proceeds. And for me, when I'm looking at that and really focusing on it, the footage sort of makes itself, as Craig McKay used to always say, that the film speaks to you. You sort of you find sort of a lucidness to the footage, and there's always moments where you see in the footage and in the performances, you're like, I need to be here at this moment. And so you start building your pieces and figuring out where you want to be, and then you fill it in as you proceed, and you play the scene back and you keep refining it. But that's where I would start, is with performance, usually in a scene like this, and there's definitely there's definitely performances and lines where you're like, yes, I absolutely need, this is what I need to use. So that's how I approach it. Thank you.
Back there. Just to make this guy run.
Hi, thank you. My question is to Lynne. This. I have a couple of questions actually. This is in regards to the episode Salud in season 4. I'm not sure if that was something edited, but or when Jesse is usually involved in an act of shooting, or when he shoots a gun, it's edited in really like a jerky, fashion. That's something I didn't notice while I was watching the show the first time. The second time, it's like the screen, it's a weird kind of jump cut where, it's jump cut, but it's edited in like a music video. Can you talk about the process of coming to that? And the second question is, could you just give some trivia about some decisions that were made in the edit? Some great moments of the show that evolved only in the editing room. Thanks.
Well, I didn't work on season 4, but I think anytime Jesse had a gun, Jesse, as a character, wasn't someone who was a born killer. He wasn't born to be violent. He was a goof. And that was set up very, very early. As a matter of fact, Jesse in the original script was supposed to die in the pilot. And we all just went, oh, no. The chemistry between these two guys is so great that you have got to keep him alive. He's fantastic. From the moment he rolled off the roof in the pilot.
Was it shot that part where he was killed?
No, it evolved pretty much. And the pilot sort of cliffhangs anyway, so you're not sure. I think Jesse's still kind of, I think he's still in the pilot, and you're not 100% sure if he's going to get better or if he's going to come out of that, down face on the Winnebago. But I think just in establishing Jesse as a character, we wanted to keep him as kind of a heartbeat for the show, and even though he was a drug dealer and then essentially a drug maker and then obviously somebody who became a much more dangerous human being, that evolution took place over 5 years. He still was a really decent human being, and I think probably the jerkiness of the gun was his just not being able to handle the situation. I don't know who cut that. If it was Kelly, I know that as she cuts, she really likes the aggressiveness of jump cutting, so it's possible she instilled that too. But I would bet if you went back and watched the series, you would see that Jesse never handles the gun well. Key moments of the show, there are just a lot of beautiful little, grace notes in that show. There was a show called Albuquerque that I cut that you got the teddy bear coming in out of the, the sky, and that shot was an amazing bit of photography. The series always opened at the beginning of each season, setting up where we would end at the end. And if you go back and even look at the titles on the second episode, they build to the end of the episode. It's like whatever that flight number was that crashed. I think it was like something to ABQ, because ABQ was like the last episode of that season. So it was set up in the titles of the show where we were going, and you could see little bits of the pink teddy bear, I think, floating in the water. So there were hints all through there of where each episode's going to take you to the next, and then it all flashed back, and you go, oh, so that's what this season was about. I just think there were a million pieces of that were really fun. One of the most fun things, though, that I got to do, because I was only there for the first 2 seasons, was a Narcos Corridos video, and there were really some great musical montages in that show. But the Narcos Corridos video was really a different headspace for me. I'd never seen a Narcos Corridos video before, and for those of you who've never seen one, look them up on the internet. They are videos funded by the drug cartels to glorify themselves. So in this Narcos Corridos video, it's Heisenberg, and he gets taken down as opposed to actually winning, which is what he pretty much did. But it's the weirdest kind of cutting I'd ever done. It's like, imagine if you'd never taken a film class and you had all these bells and whistles on your very first Avid, and you could do whatever you wanted. And that's what these guys do. They cut in their garage. They've got garage bands. We actually had a Narcos Corridos song written by Vince Gilligan and our music supervisor, Thomas Golubic. And they got guys who were Narcos Corridos singers to come in and do it, and then they filmed this video. And I mean, I've got every cheesy device you can think of in it, because that's how they would have shot it, and it was really fun. It wasn't like, if you're a film editor and you've been doing it for a while, this was like, oh my God, this is the weirdest video I've ever seen in my life, but it was so fun. The montages are fun in that series.
Boy, time flies. I think we're out of time. I want to thank Lynne and Naomi for joining me up here today. You guys were great. So will you guys be at the party after? Please come up to us afterwards at the party and ask any further questions. Sorry we ran out of time. Thanks, guys.